Okay. I want to start off. I think I may have mentioned this study before. I knew I had the slide someplace set up um, about at least reaching the odds of reaching financial success, what your depending on what your GPA is. And so this is a study of 700 American millionaires, just again to confirm what I already told you, but to put it in some numbers. Out of that, their average GPA was 2.9. So many of you have better than a 2.9 average. But that's the average GPA of millionaires in America. So the grades aren't any more predictive, according to this study, no more predictive of life success than just rolling the dice. In other words, there's no correlation, is what they're saying. No correlation between your GPA and success in your career anyway. Again, we need to consider more than just career, but as far as success in career goes, it's rolling the dice. Your GPA matters not at all, not at all. Your effort, your interest, your self-motivation, your willingness to continue learning after you graduate, those things do matter. Your GPA does not matter. So that's when I was going to watch Will Smith. Yeah, I'm going to turn off the mic right now. You can get me in trouble if you want to, but I'm going to, in fact, besides the mic, I'm going to turn off. Okay, so last week we started talking about 7 Habits of Highly Effective People, and we kind of did an overview of it. We went through this paradigm graphic, and we talked a little bit already about being proactive. But today we're going to focus just on that one element, being proactive. And Dr. Covey says it is the most important of his 7 habits, because he says if you are not proactive, you're not going to achieve the other 6 habits. So it all begins with you believing, as Will Smith said, that you believing that you can become a better person by building these habits in yourself, and that's a proactive function. If you don't believe it, you're not going to do it, and so you have to believe that in order to accomplish the 7 habits. Thus, that's his number 1 habit, and the one he says is the most important. They're all important, and I might even feel like arguing with him sometimes about that, but it's hard to. I mean, that's if you don't, if you can't do one, you're not going to accomplish the other. So, what can I say? That's true. So we'll talk about habit 1, being proactive. Again, proactive. Well, we'll get to a definition in a second. But actually, before we get there, a second. How many think that B is white? That block in the very center, that it's white. Did everybody see white there? I would dare say that no matter whether you dare raise your hand or not, you all think that's white. But you're all wrong. It's not white. They've down here in the lower right, they've gone in there with Photoshop or something and taken out a little bit of color from the B and from the A, and they put them next to each other. They're exactly the same color. A and B are exactly the same. Our minds will not allow us to see that. We see that they're different. And guess what? We can't stop ourselves. It's not like that image I showed you last week where of the young woman and the old woman. That one you can train yourself to see the old woman. This one you can't see. Our minds absolutely refuse to let us see that B is as dark as A. We cannot see it. Our minds can be extremely deceptive to us. We perceive what we expect to perceive in many cases, and this is an example. We expect to see that as white, we see that as white, and our minds will not let us see anything else. Sadly, that's true with other things besides a graphic. That sometimes we fool ourselves because we expect, our background, our conceptual framework, we talked about that before. Our conceptual framework says this should be white, therefore we see white. And we can't stop ourselves in this case from seeing white. Sometimes we have that same problem with seeing ourselves. I told you before that I talked about my two friends in high school. One had a perfect 4.0, and the other one had pretty much a perfect 1.0. And I told you that one became a prison counselor and felt like he could best serve the world by doing that. That's the smart one. And the dumb one became, and it may be no surprise having me as your professor, but this dumb one became a college professor. Instructor anyway, an instructor of mechanics. And he was seen as the dumbest student in our class. But he became a college instructor. I admire him because he did not allow the social mirror to persuade him that there's no way he could ever be successful. Because the social mirror can very commonly does that. The social mirror is what other people around us tell us, either directly or indirectly, just how they react to us. Sometimes will tell us that we're not acceptable. We're dumb, we're clumsy, we're something. We don't look good, whatever the social mirror has decided. Mirror, mirror on the wall, you're the biggest loser of them all, so to speak. And that is the problem with the social mirror, and yet it's not true. It is not true. Dennis is an example, and I admire him because he broke that social mirror, so to speak. He refused to allow the social mirror tell him that he was too stupid to be a college instructor. That to me is amazing, that he could do that. I'm not sure that I could do that. Yes, I'm good at stuff that you get good grades with. As I mentioned, there's many different intelligences according to a Harvard professor. My brother got mediocre grades, but he's a genius, perhaps, or up there in his social intelligence, how he relates to other people. Therefore, he's a millionaire. I'm good at math and memorizing stuff and writing books and reading books and all the stuff you have to do to be a professor, and I'm worth 10 cents compared to him. So what's the difference? Well, I'm good at stuff that gets measured in school. He was good at stuff that does not get measured in school. If anything, it gets measured negatively. If you're talking to your friends, you get in trouble. And so he was good at that stuff, and I'm good at this stuff. I admire the heck out of him. He actually admires me for doing the stuff I do. Money has never been my objective in life. It's more of a means to an end to me. I'm not jealous of him. Obviously, I wouldn't mind if he gave me all of his money. That's fine. I would take it and I'd probably give it to the poor or something. I wouldn't keep it. But I'm not jealous of it. And sometimes he acts like he is jealous of me, that I get to travel the world and do stuff that I do. But I don't think he really is. If he would not trade, he enjoys his life the way it is. And so he would not choose my life, and I would not choose his life. So intelligence, our different intelligences leads us different directions. And many times that social mirror is like a mirror you see sometimes at a circus or something that makes you look funny, makes you look fat, makes you look tall and skinny or whatever. I don't know if you have those in this part of the world, but that's something you see at a circus frequently in America. And so you can't trust the crazy mirror. in this case, the social mirror. Dr. Covey himself experienced this. There was a accidental study conducted in Great Britain. I say accidental because nobody set it up. But when they realized what happened, they had to explore it. What happened is that a certain school had taken a test and sent in to be graded by the organization that created the test. And when they sent the test scores back, they somehow flipped the grading. So the worst students got the best grades and the best students got the worst grades. But they didn't find this out until they were like a couple of months into the semester. And lo and behold, perhaps because the teacher saw those grades, suddenly the dumb students, so to speak, they were scoring like 15% higher than they should have. They were suddenly smarter. And the good students were suddenly scoring about 15% lower than they should have. They were suddenly stupider. There was no academic reason for that to happen. They did want to study to make sure it wasn't based on teacher bias or whatever, but it was true even with objective tests that the teacher didn't have to interpret, like math and stuff like that. Suddenly the dumb students were better and the better students were dumber. And so that's an illustration of the social mirror, that something happened there that caused that to happen that doesn't make any real good sense. But the social mirror was telling these people, giving them vibes, either you're better than you think or you're worse than you think, and they were acting accordingly. And so Dr. Covey was doing some workshops, and anyway, it suddenly made him think about his own son. Dr. Covey had 10 children. So he was busy all over the place. He was busy writing books, he was busy teaching, and he was busy having kids and taking care of them. But they had one son that was just not like the other children. The other children were fairly athletic, they were quick, they learned quickly, and this son, when they started him into baseball, so the pitcher would pitch the ball and he'd swing the bat before the ball even got to him. And in school, he was very slow learning. He couldn't do well in tests. And they tried helping him. They tried encouraging him. They did everything they could, they thought, to help this son get up to par. But finally, they kind of, in their own minds, they kind of said, well, I guess, every family has to have a dumb one. I guess, that was kind of their final conclusion. But then Dr. Covey, thinking about this study, this British study, I wonder if there's something we're doing that is making this situation worse. So he and his wife started talking about it, and they agreed that they were going to be as totally non-judgmental as possible, not show any, certainly no verbal communication, but not even to the extent possible, no non-verbal communication to this son that he was anything but perfect. Just love him for who he was. Not worry about the fact he would not be a good athlete, probably, and not worry about the fact that they might have to help him become a C student. Just love him and accept him as he was and give him no negative, not allow anything to act as that social mirror to tell him he was something inferior. And so they started implementing that. Anyway, by the time he became a teenager, he was a star athlete and a star student. He was in American football, he was a star quarterback for the university where I attended and where Dr. Covey taught and did it, and anyway, worked for quite a while before he became famous. So what happened? You could have a couple of conclusions. One might be he was just, slow in progressing, and some people are that way. People who grow up in a bilingual home, for example, take longer to speak. We know that. Not always, but typically they're hearing two languages and they're trying to make some sense out of it in their mind. And so they may take longer to learn how to speak because their minds are working on this. Well, apparently their son's mind was working on something and that they could not perceive. It wasn't being bilingual. And so, how much was this social mirror? How much was just a delay in his progress? Who can really say for sure? But instead of being, the most challenged of their children, he was the star among his children. He was the one that had a chance to be a professional athlete if he'd wanted to be and so forth, which was totally unexpected after the way he started, when it made no sense to ever predict that. So do not fall prey to the social mirror. So there's basically three theories on how we become who we are. One is genetic, that just our genes cause us to be who we are. And sometimes you have to wonder about that. It does seem like, some children, in fact, there's been cases where twins have been separated after birth, and one has gone to one family and one's gone to another family to be raised. And when they get together, they have so many things in common anyway. So is there some genetic effect? It sure seems like it sometimes. Psychological determinism basically says your parents, your childhood experience did it to you. This kind of goes along with the idea that if your parents beat you, that you'll beat your children very frequently. That you inherit that sort of discipline. You don't have to, but you might, because and the tendency is to do that you end up being a parent like your parents were parents and things like that. And so how it affects you psychologically going through this will have some determination, they say. And in others, it's the environmental, what's around you, your socioeconomic standing. You're poor, so you end up stealing because you need stuff, and so your social, economic, and so forth environment will cause you to be who you are. And what Dr. Covey says, no, they're all wrong. They all may have an effect, but they're not an effect that you have to give yourself over to. You may have to fight them. It's the example I've given several times. If your parents beat you, you do not have to beat your children. You can think that through and decide, is this the sort of parent I want to be? And watch some videos and see how other parents are parents, and do whatever to try to make a decision for yourself, what you want to do, and so forth. We've seen the movie of which is Cheek, whatever his name is, the guy with no arms and no legs. And again, certainly there's a genetic effect about that. I mean, somehow he was born with no arms and no legs. But you can still, if you're proactive, do like he did. You can become an inspirational speaker. You can become a movie star. On the last day of class, we'll watch his movie that kind of helped make him famous. Did a great job. So, you don't have to give in to even something that terrible. You can make it. A lot of what Covey taught ends up in cartoons. Where I'm residing, Ford City, that's where, but not for long. With a positive mental attitude, I can whip it. I don't know. I think maybe I'll make a lateral move to self-pity. So we talked a little bit about, I mentioned, I think last week, Pavlov's dogs, and how how was it when he worked with the animals, as soon as it got to where they associated the bell with food. And so as soon as he rang the bell, the dogs were sure they're going to be fed. They'd start salivating. Their bodies would react to it, things like that. There's actually, you could probably find it on YouTube. I haven't watched it for a while. but they can actually teach a rat how to play basketball. And there's one video I watched. They basically, when they just started approaching the basket, they would get some food would kick out for them to eat, and it would, they'd have to get closer and closer to get that food to kick out for him to eat, and then they wouldn't give him any food unless he touched a ball. So then he touched the ball, and then they wouldn't give him the food unless he picked up the ball. So he picked up the ball. And then they wouldn't give him food unless he lifted it up towards the basket. So he lifted up to the basket after a while. So all of this is just teaching them by which is what they do with lots of circus animals, basically, is you reward them for doing what you want, but you can't do it on the first day. You don't wait. On the first day, you're not going to get that rat to play basketball. You have to get the rat to get closer to the basket, touch the ball, lift the ball, put the ball in the basket, and then, and each, as he does each of those actions progressively, you reward him, and then stop rewarding worse actions. So again, just touching the ball isn't enough. After he's touched the ball, he now has to lift it. And he has to get better at what he's doing. So you can teach animals, including rats, even something as fairly complicated as playing basketball. And so that kind of suggests the stimulus response. We give you a stimulus, we can cause you to do a response that we want you to do. And there is some truth to that. There is, we do have that inclination. We can be trained in a way like that rat. But we don't have to. And that's the difference between us and all the other animals. And one of the main reasons why I don't believe, I told you about the Seattle scientists who are trying to prove that we're part of a computer game, because they're seeing in the way the universe is made that it's too perfect, it's too mathematical. And so they're starting to disbelieve that we exist, except in somebody's computer or something like that, that somebody created us and they've created us in a mathematical way that is beyond chance. And so one reason why I don't believe that is, and I guess actually those scientists in Seattle are basing their research on this, there's too many choices we can make. We have an infinite number of choices that each one of us can make. How do you make a computer game out of that? How do you give every actor in the computer game infinite options? Well, you can't do it. I mean, that is beyond our comprehension to be able to do that. Let me put it that way. We could not do that. And so the scientists in Seattle are trying to catch God, or whoever you want to call him, whoever made the computer game, trying to catch him taking a shortcut. Aha, he didn't give us that choice. He didn't make that option available. So they're trying to look at our existence and trying to find the shortcut. Where did he make the shortcut? If they can find the shortcut, then they can prove that we're basically programmed. But so far they haven't found the shortcut. And I don't think they will, because I don't think we are a computer game. But, and that's why, too many options. It's an infinite number of options in this computer game, if we're a computer game. And so whoever programmed us would have to be amazing programmer. In this space, as Dr. Covey calls it, between the stimulus and response is when we get to choose, when we have that infinite number of choices. I want to just talk for a few minutes about 4 people who made choices that make no sense in a way. Viktor Frankl was actually a psychology professor, a psychologist and a psychology professor in Germany during the 1940s, during World War II. And he actually did not, he was a determinist. He believed that we could not control ourselves, that our situation, our genetics, and our situation would determine our actions, and we could not do anything about it. But then he was Jewish, and they threw him into a concentration camp. In the concentration camp, he saw a lot of his family members and loved ones and friends die before his eyes. he saw that some of them were just dying because they just gave up the will to live. They could not live under those conditions anymore, and so they just laid down and just died. He found, first thing he noticed about himself, though, is that he was able to overcome that a little bit by escaping the prison, in a sense. In his mind, he could escape the prison. So in his mind, when he was laying down in his bed or whatever, he could escape to his family cabin in the mountains. And he could experience again, I'll get that back up here in a second, but you already saw the slide. So he would experience again, he would experience what he could hear, the birds singing and so forth. Maybe coyotes howling in the night. He could try to relive the smell of the woods, of the evergreens, that distinct smell that a pine tree has, or so forth. He could re-envision hiking through the woods and looking out over the horizon. So in a very, very real sense, he escaped prison in his mind. And so he started thinking, what other freedoms can they not take from me? And so one of those, he decided they would not stop him if he started encouraging other people to be more positive, help them escape also in their minds. But he decided to start a university in the prison. And so there were a lot of smart people there like him, and so they started teaching classes. So people would be more successful if and when they ever got out of that concentration camp. They didn't know they'd ever get out. They had seen a lot of their friends and family members killed. But just in case, and just to stay as positive as they could in the meanwhile, they started teaching classes and helping people get smarter and smarter in preparation for that day when they would get out, hopefully. And so when he was finally rescued from the concentration camp, he wrote a famous book. Sorry, I forget the name of it. But he wrote a famous book that basically challenged everything he used to think. He no longer believed that circumstances or genetics or anything else controlled you. He believed in being proactive, that you could do with your freedom, with that space between stimulus and response, you could do something that you decided to do. You did not have to do what the normal person would do. Let me try to get this going again. I don't know why it's doing this to me. There we go. Not touching it. Anwar Sadat was the first Muslim to ever win a Nobel Prize of any kind. He won the Nobel Peace Prize. But his change in his life also began when he was in prison. He and other people ultimately overthrew the king of Egypt. But in the process of getting to that point where they could overthrow him, he was thrown in prison. Anwar was. And so he was in prison several years, and it gave him a chance to think about his life and what he wanted to accomplish in his life. And even though he did end up helping overthrow the king of Egypt, he also saw, that maybe he started questioning whether some of the things he had always thought would actually lead to the betterment of his country or more success to himself. And so after the 6-Day War, when Egypt lost quite a bit of property to the Israelis, who smashed them in 6 days, he decided it was time to stop fighting. That he wanted to negotiate and see if they could live in peace. And so he did. He entered into negotiations with the Israeli prime minister, and they got their land back, and they agreed no more fighting between Egypt and Israel. I think that's been true ever since. I don't think Egypt has ever taken them on since then. And he became president of Egypt. Nasser was the president before him. He was the vice president. He became the president, and he turned Egypt into a democracy. um, in a real sense. Before that, they might have called themselves a democracy, but they only had one party. It's a one-party system. And it's kind of possible to have a democracy with one party, but it's not very democratic because that one party tries to manipulate everybody and so forth. So he made it a multi-party system, and which led to it being a true democracy. I know they've had problems here and there since then with that, as many developing countries do. But he did decide we're not only going to have peace with Israel, we're going to become a true democracy. We're going to have a free economy. We're going to be like America, whatever, and because our people will be better off and we'll be happier if we end war, focus on development, create the environment in which our people can be successful. Well, he's ultimately assassinated by a Muslim who did not agree that he should have created this peace treaty with Israel. A harder core Muslim sect that didn't like what he did. And so he was assassinated, he was killed. But he, I don't know, there's a line, there really was a person named Joan of Arc. How many have heard of Joan of Arc? Nobody? Well, that's more, again, one of those things that maybe, there really was a young woman who, I think at age 14, felt like God told her that she was supposed to lead the armies of France, which seemed bizarre in and of itself, that she would think that. Definitely self-delusional, it would seem. But she started, I don't remember all the steps it took to get there, but ultimately they considered her, that she did become their leader. At a very young age, she became the leader of the French armies, and led into victory after victory. Ultimately, I think they lost the battle. Anyway, ultimately, they decided, whoever was in power decided she was a witch, and they burned her at stake. So I'm not here to tell you that she really did talk to God. I don't know. But history is that she actually did become the leader of the army, did lead it in many successful victories, and ultimately was tried as a witch and condemned to death and was burned to death. Anyway, in the theatrical version of her life, she says something I think is important. And she said, again, this is not probably what she really said, but in the theater, she said, she was asked about, being afraid to die or whatever it says. She said something like, everybody dies. But some people, if you die for something that matters, that's what's important. Some people, most people, live and die for nothing. And that's worse than dying young. And so I would say with Anwar Sadat, it's better that even he would rather have died by assassination and having done the things he did that he felt was right. And other people too, like that. The people that are really proactive, who really change the world, they would not change it even if they're killed for it. Another person who was killed, who was assassinated, was Mahatma Gandhi. Again, where did he start? In South Africa. He was sent to prison. It's starting to see a pattern here that if you don't go to prison, you can't be successful. I guess, I don't know. But he also went to prison. And he learned things from that, and his own belief system drove him to make choices that other people would not have made. So ultimately he led to the freedom of India by convincing people we don't have to be violent. We don't have to fight. We don't have to shoot and kill. All we have to do is not go to work. If they don't get any of our products that we've been producing and exporting to them, they will realize that we're a better friend than we are a slave. And ultimately, that's what led to their freedom, was that Indians they followed his leadership. I mean, he was willing to self-sacrifice. He fasted for many days. He wore simple clothing. He was a trained attorney. He was a very smart man. But he lived like the poor. He went around the country to talk to them, and he, like I said, he was willing to fast for many days for what he believed. And people, at one point, people were just, please stop fasting. You're going to kill yourself. But he wanted to demonstrate how far he would go for what he believed in. And ultimately, the country followed him and gained their freedom without having to fight anybody. And then, of course, he was assassinated. Alexander Solzhenitsyn is the most modern of these. He won a Nobel Prize in Literature maybe in the 1980s, I think in the 1980s. He lived under the Soviet Union. I think his Pulitzer, or his Nobel, the Nobel Prize in Literature must have been the late 70s or early 80s. Because anyway, he was sent to a work camp in Siberia, where it's very, very cold. And he every day had to go out and do whatever they had to do at their work camp. I'm not sure what they were doing at that Gulag Archipelago, which was the name of his most famous book. So he put in his work. One of the things he said is when somebody takes everything away from you, then they've lost you. They've lost control over you. When they take everything away from you, they have nothing else to take. You don't care if you die. Then they've now lost control, which was an interesting perspective. But anyway, he had one piece of paper, and he decided to write a novel with one piece of paper. What he had to do was write until he filled the paper in as small print as he could, and then he memorized everything on that sheet of paper. Then he erased it and started over again. Each sheet of paper in his book was like 800 pages when he got done. He had to memorize every page as he wrote it and then go on. And so, like I said, that's one reason why that book, Gulag Archipelago, which is where he wrote it, basically, in the Gulag is like their prison work camp. Why that was most famous is what he had to go through to write that book, basically. So he won the Nobel Prize, and he got kicked out of. They decided he was too famous to kill him, so they kicked him out of the country. He went to America for a few years until the Soviet Union collapsed, and then he went back and lived the rest of his life back in Russia. But all these men, like I said, besides all going to prison for what they believed, and letting that prison actually be part of the defining factor in their lives, it was the opposite factor than what most people would probably have. They did the unusual thing. They reacted totally different than most people reacted in those same prisons, in that same gulag, and that whatever. They changed their lives in their mind, and so when they got out, they changed their lives in reality. They exercised freedom that other people didn't know they had, so to speak, that other people didn't have because they didn't think they had those freedoms. These men changed their lives in their mind, in prison, and then changed the world when they came out. Okay, so proactivity is the ability to control one's environment rather than have it control you. That is, as is often the case. It's self-determination, choice, and power to decide response to stimuli, conditions, and circumstances. Dr. Covey says you can detect this even in how people talk. A proactive person takes responsibility for everything in life. In some ways, and things he shouldn't take responsibility for. But he takes responsibility in the sense that he does not accept that the things outside of him control him. And he knows that if there's something that he could do, even if it wasn't his fault, even if he was accused innocently or whatever, what can I do is one of his first questions is, what can I do that would have, or what could I have done that could have changed the situation? What can I do that will solve this problem in the future? They first look at themselves because they know that's the only thing they can control. And so hopefully, and as they control their own responses, then they can control to some indirectly other people's responses to them. The reactive person just blames other people and makes that as an excuse not to be successful. And we kind of talked about this before. The people that are reactive frequently say things like, if only, fill in the blank. If only, then I could be successful. If only, and like say, you can fill in the blank. If only my wife were more supportive. If only I had more education. If only I were raised by better parents. If only I'd grown up in the city. If only you can fill in whatever you want to there. But the reactive person fills in that blank and gives himself an excuse not to be a better person, not to be more successful. That's the reactive person, and they will never succeed that way. So in between stimulus and response, Dr. Covey says, again, what other animals don't have, we have a self-awareness. Again, why I don't believe in that study, that we're computer games. We have a self-awareness that, and we have imagination, we have a conscience, we have an independent will, we have an infinite number of responses. That's not a computer game. It's also not another animal. Other animals do not have these qualities that we have. So we are unique. That's one reason why some people question the theory of evolution, because the jump between humanity and the next closest thing to us is huge. It's huge. When you really get down and analyze the difference between us and an ape, for example, it's a huge difference. We may want to personalize them. We may want to say, oh, isn't that just like a baby, or isn't that just like a person? But what they're doing is still light years behind what humans do, what humans are capable of doing. Okay, I want to watch this video. So once you learn and understand the skill, doesn't mean it becomes automatic. And that's why Dr. Covey suggests that you may want to spend 1 month at a time working on one of the habits, maybe even 2 months. If it's a habit that's really hard for you, spend 3 or 4 months on that one habit. And you'll hear him when you listen to his video. One of the first things he says, I believe it's in this video, is that being proactive controls everything, all the other habits. If you're not proactive, you're not going to master any of the habits, probably, because being proactive is the thing that gives you the impetus, gives you the courage, gives you the motivation and the belief that you can adopt all of those habits. If you're not proactive, you give up right away. That's hard. It's hard work in building those habits in your life. Anyway, taking the initiative and trying to figure out how to apply these habits in your life and so forth, is part of it. With your interaction with other people, it's the belief that you can come up with a solution, you can sell it to other people, get other people to buy into it, and together solve a problem. It takes some effort to employ as we go through all these 7 habits, to employ them. You have to, again, understand them. You have to accept them. You have to integrate them into your life. And that's not as easy as me remembering to read part of a book when I go into the restroom. That's an easy one. This is not so easy. As he points out here, it's you have to develop some muscles, so to speak, some proactive muscles. It's not just positive thinking, although positive thinking can help you do this. If you don't think positively, then you probably aren't going to do it. And so, yes, you need to be a positive thinker, but he would ridicule those who think that positive thinking is the only thing you need to be successful. That to be ultimately successful, that may be a starting point, but it's not the ending point. These habits help you change from the inside out. They may start with being a positive thinking and being proactive and building those proactive muscles. And in the process, you need to be creative and resourceful. And how do I do this? How do I change my life? It's not just a matter of brute force. You may have to figure out how to, for example, control your time better. When am I going to have time? For example, this is kind of overlaps into habit 3. And I may say it again just because I always think about it when I talk about habit 3, which is putting first things first. But think of Stephen Covey himself. 10 kids, full-time job, working on his PhD, and he had to set aside some time to write this book. If he hadn't set aside some time, and he had plenty of excuses not to spend the time writing this book. I mean, he had, even himself, he talks about how important the family is and so forth. So he had some really big reasons why he should not have taken, or why he could have easily talked himself out of allocating time to write a book. He was a very busy person. Lots of kids, a wife, things to do, people to take care of. But there's a book I read when I was younger. I don't know if you can find it now, but it says what you can do in 15 minutes a day. And it just made it, basically all it was a list of like 1,000 things you could do if all you did was dedicate 15 minutes a day to doing that. It might take you years, but you could do it. My wife is an amazing person. Her husband, first husband, was cheating on her. He even brought another woman into their own apartment and had sex with her in their bedroom, in their apartment. He was drinking too much. He was abusive, had hit her more than once. And she finally decided, this is not the life I'm going to put up with. And so she left. It was like many countries where men are given privileges that women don't have. They were living in an apartment that her dad gave them when they were married, and her husband took the apartment. So she had to move. Her dad found her a place to live that had no heat in it. So they had like a wood stove or something they could heat up, but she couldn't afford much when she moved out from her husband. Her husband just laughed at her and said, you're going to come running back to me begging for my help because you can't survive by yourself. You don't have the skills. You don't have the ability to survive by yourself, which made her all the more determined that she would. She worked really hard. She had worked 12-hour days, starting off just like cleaning other people's toilets and stuff. Well, she was working for there. They had a big energy sector, so they were. So she was basically working at a camp of workers, including foreign workers that were working to take out the energy in Kazakhstan. And so she was just started off cleaning the rooms of these workers. And gradually she did become a manager, but she still wasn't paid very much. So she was making $137 a month. 137, not very much in dollars. I mean, it was obviously different in tenge, which is their currency in Kazakhstan. But she had made the equivalent of $130 or $138 a month. She decided, I'm going to build a house with this. But here she was taking care of her kids, paying for her utilities. I think she was still living in the house that her dad, that had no heat and stuff in it, but that her dad had provided for her after her divorce. So she could keep her expenses down, but just basically eating rice and cheap stuff, not buying clothes very much. Every month she'd take out of that $137, $138, she would go buy something for her future house. It might be a bag of adobe mix with which she could build her bricks. And so she'd buy it, and then the summertime when it's better weather, she would do that. She brick by brick, she'd build the bricks herself, put them in place. She learned how to weld. metal. She learned how to do plumbing. It took her 7 years to build her house at just a few dollars a month. And her house is a pretty nice house. It's I know you guys think in meters, square meters, and I don't think that way, but it's a good sized house that she built while taking care of her family for $137 a month. When she told me that story, I just couldn't believe it. How do you build a house that nice? And her walls are thick like this, made out of adobe. Her walls are almost maybe not quite a meter, but more than a half a meter wide. A very strong house. But she was just determined she was going to change her life. And while her friends were spending their money in nice clothes and going out to have fun, she was building her house. 7 years. And she was also teaching herself English, thinking that she'd get a better job, and as it turned out, she got me instead. Anyway, that's the sort of determination and reaction. Her husband said you could never do it. She did it. It took her a lot of determination, a lot of time. She had to learn new stuff. She had to work hard, but she did it. Anyway, you can tell the difference in the language of people who are reactive or proactive. I kind of suggested if somebody says, there's nothing I can do, that's just the way I am, he makes me so mad, if only, sort of like I said earlier, that's the language of a reactive person. Let's look at our alternatives. I can choose a different approach. I control my own feelings. That's the language of a proactive person. I'll upload this obviously to Moodle. I'm not going to try to read through all this, but again, some language of the difference between reactive people and proactive people. And I think as you adopt these habits, you have to adopt the language too. You have to watch what you're saying. Because as you talk, that's how you think. So you change the way you're thinking, you change the way you're talking, and then in the process, you're changing your attitude, you're changing your approach to life, you're changing your paradigm. You also start in the realm of the second set of 3 habits. You start changing your circle of concern and your circle of influence. You have a circle of concern, things that matter to you. And you have only a certain amount of a circle of influence. Usually we start off with the circle of concern being quite big and our circle of influence being quite small. And so we think we can only do so much. Our country's not being run well, our city's not being run well, whatever, I can't do anything about it. But then you become proactive and you start rallying other people to do something about it. And pretty soon you start changing your city, and people start protesting a little bit or whatever, and things start changing. If you do that, your circle of influence will grow. In fact, it will grow. I thought I might maybe put another slide in there. It can actually grow to where your circle of influence is greater than your circle of concern. In some situations, that has occurred to me, and I'm sure that occurred to Dr. Covey for sure, is that after a while, people want you to help them with their problems because they've seen that you solved all these other problems. And so their problems are not part of your concern other than you want to be nice to them. And so you get a bunch of people coming here, help me solve my problem. You solve that problem, come help me solve my problem. When they see that you're proactive, they want you as part of their life to solve their problems. Well, you have to kind of resist that a little bit because if it's not part of your circle of concern, now you might be distracted from your priorities, from the things you want to do, and really helping them because they're lazy or because they're not proactive, because they just want to find an easy way out, and you're the guy who gets things done, so they want you to help them do what they could do if they put their effort to it, if they became more proactive. And so, again, as you grow, as the more harder you try, the more you exercise your proactive muscles, the greater your circle of influence becomes, even to the point where it's greater than your circle of concern. There's some things, there's lots of problems. Some things you have direct control over. Some things you can affect by indirect control. For example, maybe you can't do it, and you don't have the power to do it, but maybe you can talk to somebody who does, and you can try to influence them. That's kind of more indirect control. And some things you have no control, and you accept that, at least for the time being. It may be that after you exercise your proactive muscles a little bit, you will get to the point where you can influence things that currently you have no control over. There was I want to tell a couple of stories before we end, so that's why I'm watching the clock. I may skip some slides here. Well, for one thing, you're going to watch a 50-minute video where Dr. Covey will explain the stuff himself. So I don't want to be the two stories. I don't think he tells this one story in the video. I could be wrong. But anyway, I'm going to tell you one of his stories anyway. He said there's this guy who was part of this big organization, and the CEO was not a good people person. He did not have a good relationship with his employees. In fact, there was a big rift there, and it was hurting the company. And so, but there was one person, rather than standing around the water cooler or whatever and complaining about their boss, he decided he was going to do something about it. And so he would get done with his work and he'd go in to the boss, maybe give the boss a report he's supposed to write or something. And he'd say, well, I'm caught up in my work. Is there anything I can do for you? To the boss. Now, this may seem like in America, we might call this brown nosing, kind of kissing up to the boss and trying to catch his favor, mainly for yourself. But that wasn't what his motive was. He really did want to help the company, because the company might actually fail if he didn't do it. And also, he could help his co-workers if he could change his boss or change the situation a little bit. And so rather than just complaining with his co-workers, he thought this was the way he thought maybe he could do something. And so at first his boss didn't really believe that he was sincere about wanting to help him. But as he proceeded, as they got to know each other better, the boss would give him a few things to do, and he'd come back and having done them perfectly. And so he would give him some more things to do, and he'd do them perfectly. And so pretty soon the boss became totally reliant on him. And once that happened, now he could speak for the other workers. Now he became the liaison between the boss and the workers, because the boss did not have a good did not exercise good communication with the workers, and the workers not with the boss. And so he became the conduit between the boss and the workers. And the whole company changed, because rather than standing around complaining about the boss, he did something about it. I've been in those sorts of situations myself, and it is quite amazing. When I first got to Kazakhstan, I was the new kid on the block. I didn't know what I was doing. And they asked if anybody would want to work on their annual research conference. And I thought, well, I'm not real busy right now. I haven't been given a lot of extra assignments, and I'm here by myself in Kazakhstan. So, yeah, I'll go volunteer. So I went, and I didn't think I was doing anything special, frankly. But they would ask, well, can somebody do this? And I'd say, yeah, I'll do that for you. And I did it. I mean, I didn't think I was doing it that well. I just thought, I did it the best I could, and I maybe am a little bit of a perfectionist, but I didn't think I was doing anything extraordinary. But, I very frequently accepted assignments, and I did them. And so they knew they could depend on me. So we got to the last week, and this was the first time it ever struck me that somehow they had become dependent on me. kind of like this guy going to his boss. And I didn't realize it until the last week. When we had our last organizational meeting before the conference, they said, okay, we have 7 things we need to do. Ken, we want you to do 4 of them. And so there were 12 people in the room. They assigned me to do 4 of them and the other 12 people to do 3 of them. And I thought, now that's strange. But I mean, I appreciated the fact that they trusted me to be the one to do them, and they didn't trust anybody else, apparently. And so just by being dependable, that relationship grew. And I guess background you should know, this was set up by the College of Business. There are 2 colleges at the university, the College of Business and the College of Social Sciences. As a journalism professor, I was in the College of Social Sciences, and the conference had been set up by the College of Business. And I'll get back to why that's relevant, but I didn't see any difference. It's a conference for the whole university and for all the people we would invite. So anyway, the day of that first conference came up, and I got a phone call from, I'm not sure which one was first, but I got 2 phone calls actually separately. One from the dean of the College of Business and one from the chairman of the conference. And both of them said, Ken, we'll be starting our conference here a little bit later. You have to be the MC, the master of ceremonies. And I said, what? I have to be the MC? You're the chairman, to the one. I said, you're the chairman of the conference. You should be the MC. He said, no, you have to be the MC. I said, okay. And then I get a call. The dean of the college didn't realize the other guy had already called. The dean of the college calls me up, says, Ken, you have to be the MC. I said, you're the dean of the college. You should be the MC. He said, no, you have to be the MC. So I was the MC. I didn't do a particularly good job because I'm not a naturally good MC, frankly. And they only gave me like an hour to prepare to be the MC. But afterwards, they had like everybody that was at the conference came out, and we stood on some stairs to have a photo. And people started yelling, Ken, come up to the front. You're in charge of this. Ken, come up to the front. I said, I'm not in charge of this. I just basically showed up to put away the chairs. I'm not in charge of anything. Anyway, ultimately, I was the first person ever not in the business college to become the chair of the conference. And for 2 years in a row, they made me the chair. Anyway, so my point is if you're proactive, you don't have to be spectacular. I'm not spectacular, but I am dependable. When I say I'm going to do something, I do it. I'm try hard. I have some pretty good skills, but I'm not spectacular. I'm just a hard worker. I'm the guy lifting bales up to my dad and nearly killing him with a hay hook. But I work hard. And you can do that too. You find if you're the person that shows up and they can depend on, you will go up in the ladder because they can depend on you. Because there are not that many people they can depend on. The other story I want to tell real quick, I have to get through here. I'll just go ahead and to the point as quick as I can. We've talked a lot about this stuff already. Actually, it's a different place. I'm going to go to a different. Okay. So this is a story of Johnny the Bagger. This was told by Barbara Glantz, who was a customer service specialist. And so I'm telling it in her story, in her words.
A few years ago, I was hired by a large supermarket chain to lead a customer service program to build customer loyalty. During my speech, I said, every one of you will be making a difference and create memories for your customers. Oops. For your customers. During my, create memories for your customers that they will motivate them then to come back. Put your personal signature on your job. Think about something you can do for your customer to make them feel special, a memory that will make them come back. About a month later, after I had spoken, I received a call from a 19-year-old bagger named Johnny, a bagger, somebody who just puts the groceries in the bag. He proudly informed me that he was a Down syndrome individual. So he had Down syndrome, which means he was a little bit mentally delayed, you could say. And he told me his story. I liked what you talked about, he said, but at first I didn't think I could do anything special for my customers. After all, I'm just a bagger. Then I had an idea, Johnny said. Every night after work, I'd come home and find a thought for the day. If I can't find a saying I like, he added, I just think one up. When Johnny had a good thought for the day, his dad helped him to set it up on the computer and print out multiple copies. Johnny cut out each quote and signed his name on the back. Then he'd bring them to work the next day. When I finished bagging someone's groceries, I'd put my thought for the day in their bag and say, thanks for shopping with us. It touched me to think that this young man with a job most people would say is not important had made it important by creating precious memories for all of his customers. A month later, the store manager called me. You won't believe what happened. When I was making my rounds today, I found Johnny's checkout line was 3 times longer than anyone else's. It went all the way back down the frozen food aisle. So I quickly announced, we need more cashiers, get more lanes open. As I tried to get people to change lanes, no one would move. They said, now I'm distracted here. They said, no, that's okay. We want to be in Johnny's lane. We want his thought for the day. The store manager continued, it was a joy to watch Johnny delight the customers. I got a lump in my throat when one woman said, I used to shop at your store once a week, but now I come in every time I go by because I want to get Johnny's thought for the day. A few months later, the manager called me again. Johnny has transformed the store. Now when the floral department has a broken flower or an unused corsage, they find an elderly woman or a little child and pin it on them. Everyone's having a lot of fun creating memories. Our customers are talking about us, they're coming back, and they're bringing their friends. A wonderful spirit of service spread throughout the entire store. And all because Johnny chose to make a difference. Johnny's idea wasn't nearly as innovative as it was loving. It came from his heart. It was real. That's what touched the customers, his peers, and those that read the story. Great service comes from the heart. Will you be a Johnny today? One thing I can tell you from this chapter is that if you're proactive, you will be 5,000% more effective than somebody who's not proactive. Think about that a second. 5,000% more effective than somebody who's not proactive. When I first read that, I thought that was hyperbole. That was an exaggeration. And then I thought about Johnny. Who changed that store? It was Johnny. If Johnny hadn't changed the store, nobody would have. He was the proactive one. He was not the smartest one. He was not the most talented one. Far from it. He was the proactive one. He was me at confidence. Not good, maybe, not real talented, but showing up and being dependable. That's Johnny. Taking it seriously, being proactive. Can being proactive make you 5,000% more effective? I think it can. I think a lot of things in my life tell me this is true. Things that I've accomplished that only were accomplished because I was proactive naturally. I don't know why I was, but I was. That I believed I could do things that I shouldn't have believed. Kind of like Will Smith said, you have to be a little delusional. I was a little delusional. You might say Johnny was a little delusional, that we thought we could change things, and we tried. And by trying, we did. So think about that. Watch the 50-minute video. What proactivity can do to change your life. Because that's where it all starts. You have to believe it. You have to think that you have to tell yourself it doesn't matter. Everything I did. I'm the president. My parents did something to me. I don't have any money. I'm not very smart. Whatever it is that you tell yourself, that some people tell themselves that if you not do anything, forget about that. You can be fine and make a difference. You can be technically the dumbest one on earth. You can be the most effective one in the earth. Because you're proactive. And all those people are proactive. The smarter, the more talented, they're not proactive. It makes 5,000% difference. And I now believe that is absolutely true. The more I think about it, the more examples I can think about it, I believe it. Okay, thank you. If you have any questions or problems that you need to deal with, I'll be up here for a while. Thank you. Thank you. Somehow I need to turn this